Hi, today we're going to take a look at the Sony a7 Mark IV. So let's see what it can do. Sony recently announced the replacement of its popular a7 III camera in the form of the a7 IV, and we got a chance to take it for a full week of extensive testing. This review is going to be different than previous ones that we did here on LensVid, as we did our best to incorporate as many tests as we could that are based on questions we received from our readers, and we also tried to use the camera in several different shooting situations. We will start with a look at some of the main external changes to the camera. Like the a7S III, the new a7 IV has a fully articulated touchscreen. The resolution is a little over 1 million dots, which is a very minor bump from the a7 III. When we set the camera to sunshine mode, we could not see a huge difference compared to our A1 camera, but the default manual mode in the A1 is brighter. We didn't see a huge difference compared to the a7 III though. The a7 IV has a new 3.69 dot electronic viewfinder. On its own it feels perfectly fine, but when you compare it side by side to the EVF of the A1, it is really night and day in terms of clarity, colors and image magnification. There are two important changes to the top dials. The first is a lower extra dial that lets you choose between stills, video and S&Q modes. It has a forward lock and it is a super useful addition in our view, especially since you now have 3 user programmable settings for each of the 3 modes, more than any other Sony camera. For the first time, Sony removed the exposure compensation dial and you can now assign it to any number of options including ISO, color temperature, white balance, etc. Very convenient. Like other recent Sony cameras, moving away from the micro HDMI is a huge plus for the a7 IV, and if you're working with monitors, you're going to enjoy this one. Like the previous model, the a7 IV has a micro USB and USB-C connections, but the USB-C is faster on the new model, supporting up to 10 gigabits per second. The a7 IV has a top video record button. This change is somewhat controversial as it forced Sony to move the C1 button next to the viewfinder, which is something not everybody likes. The new camera has a deeper grip. This one should be a welcome change to most users, even those with relatively small hands, and it is mostly similar to the grip on our A1. The a7 IV has 2 memory card slots. Both can accept SD UHS-2 cards, but only the top one can also accept the new CF Express Type A cards. The memory card door has better sealing and a small movable lock similar to other recent Sony cameras. A small but important change on the a7 IV is in the 2 strap holders, which are now non-rattling. Like the a7S III and the A1, the a7 IV supports the new menu systems and improved touch capabilities. The new menus are similar although not identical to those of the 2 other cameras. Like most other recent Sony models, the a7 IV adds support for the new hot shoe with a digital audio interface and 24-bit 4-channel recording with supported mics and adapters. The new mechanical shutter of the Sony a7 IV can sync with flash up to 1 to 400 of a second, so you can get more output from your flash when shooting outdoors during daytime. This camera can do almost everything, but the subscribe button is on you, so hit that bell icon and subscribe. The a7 IV brings a large number of software changes. Some are fairly small, others are more substantial. Breathing compensation is an exciting new video feature that corrects the breathing of a lens by cropping in slightly to compensate for the breathing. Currently, only 16 Sony lenses are supported, and we hope Sony will add many more and maybe even allow for manual addition of third-party lenses. We tested this feature on our Sony 20mm f1.8 lens and it worked very well, although it does crop quite a bit, so be mindful of that. Another interesting software feature has to do with streaming. When connected to a computer or a smartphone, you can now choose to stream as well as to simultaneously record up to 1080p at 60 frames per second, and this is the first Sony camera to allow this feature in this way. Since the new Imaging Edge app was released late in our review, we were only able to try the new fast USB Connect functionality, which allows the camera to easily display in OBS and other streaming software directly without any special apps or accessories, and it seemed to work fine. Another interesting new feature is the focus map. This new feature, currently only found on the A7 IV, shows area close to the camera in orange and further away in blue, while the area in focus has no color. In practice, we found this to be confusing. We love the idea, but Sony really needs to improve this by adding more settings for color, transparency, etc. to really make this usable. Like the A7S III and the A1, you can now shoot in the S-Cinetone profile and of course in 10-bit 422, which is one of the main new video features of this camera. The anti-dust function is a new feature which also exists on the A1 and allows the user to set the shutter to close when the camera is turned off to prevent dust from getting into the sensor when you switch lenses. Just remember never to touch the shutter as it is very delicate. Another new feature taken from the A7S III and the A1 is the ability to add a red rectangle when you record video, which is really useful. Do note that the rectangle on the A7 IV is a bit dim in non-sunshine mode compared to our A1. One final small change that we discovered has to do with the grid when connected to HDMI. For whatever reason, even the A1 did not maintain the grid when connected to an external monitor. The A7 IV fixes that, although you still can't output and simultaneously view a non-clean HDMI signal on an external monitor, which is super annoying. In order to test some of the changes we mentioned as well as the performance of the new 33 megapixel sensor and processor, we performed a long list of tests and here are some of the results that we have got. Let's start with autofocus. Although we didn't have a chance to test the new bird's eye autofocus mode in video, which at the moment only the A7 IV has in the Sony lineup, we did test the real-time tracking of the camera in both stills and video and it seems to work very well. Shooting speed on the A7 IV is a very interesting topic. The official shooting speed of the A7 IV in compressed RAW mode is 10 frames per second. In our extensive testing, however, we got lower speeds even with generous 1 frames per second margin of error, as you can see in the table that we have made. We did notice a significant improvement in buffer clearing when we used the Sony CF Express Type A card, although the actual shooting speed stayed more or less the same. At the end of the day, if you're shooting a lot of bursts, you will certainly want the CF Express Type A for this camera. One of our readers asked us to test what is the minimum memory card that this camera can use. We tried a really old SanDisk SD memory card with 20 megabytes per second write, and it sort of worked for the camera for stills, although we would of course never recommend it for this camera. For video, however, you will need a minimum of a V30 card. Another one of our readers asked us to test a moire with the new sensor. We tried with several tightly knit fabrics and compared our findings to a few other Sony cameras and found the results to be very similar, so nothing special to report on this front. The latest version of Sony's Imaging Edge app can now support the A7 IV, and from the little time that we had with it, it seems to allow us to download and view all images taken with the camera more easily and much faster, including RAW files. In our video test, rolling shutter in 4K 25p and 50p seems to be well under control with not too much distortion. While the official SIPA battery life of the A7 IV with the NP-FZ100 battery is lower than that of the A7 III at around 580 shots per charge with the LCD and 520 shots using the EVF, you can probably get more out of it in most circumstances. We have also been able to shoot between an hour and a half and 2 hours of 4K video per charge with the A7 IV depending on the bitrate and other settings. The A7 IV has improved IBIS with 5.5 stops of image stabilization with the new active mode for video, which adds gyroscope data but crops into 1.1x, which can be problematic especially in 4K 60 when the camera is already cropped in. When it comes to overheating, we tested the camera in November, and although it wasn't particularly cold, we simply didn't have enough time to do a thorough testing, so we will have to get back to this when we received a production unit of the camera. As part of our review, we joined Suf Cohen with the camera for a day of shooting on the beach. Cohen is a local stills event and surfing photographer, and he also had a chance to shoot a wedding with the camera. He has been working with the A7 III for 3.5 years and had a lot of interesting insights regarding the differences between the new and old model that are not necessarily reflected by the camera's specs or even in our own testings. Some are really small points while others show more substantial differences. The mechanical shutter of the A7 IV is louder than that of the A7 III, and actually in our testing much louder than that of the A1. The A7 IV has the option to set seconds in the clock, which is important for syncing two cameras more easily. The stabilizer of the A7 IV for stills feels a little better than that of the A7 III. Despite the increased resolution of the A7 IV, the image looks a bit cleaner in higher ISOs. The new screen looks good indoors and outdoors, even in sunlight. Working with an articulated monitor is not for everyone, and Cohen certainly prefers a tilt screen for his work. The switch between the EVF and the monitor is very quick. The camera reacts very quickly in general and it turns on faster. Shooting in uncompressed RAW feels slower than the A7 III, however compressed RAW feels significantly faster. You can now jump 10 or even 100 images in preview and not just one by one. Having the ability for the shutter to close down when switching lenses is really great. The A7 IV gets hot in the front next to the A7 IV logo during long still shooting. That is unlike the A7 III, which gets hotter behind the screen. Our understanding is that this is part of the camera's new heat dissipation system. Ergonomics on the camera is good, fairly similar bottom layout to the A7 III with some small changes which are easy to get used to. The quality of the joystick is far superior. Crop mode in stills gives you about 15 megapixels of resolution, which is very useful in many circumstances, especially for web use. So let's conclude. After spending a full week with the A7 IV, we can say that Sony created a very strong all-around professional camera. Although we might be spoiled by our A1, the A7 IV felt very familiar to us with a similar body, menus, and a quality autofocus system. The A7 IV is a jump forward in almost any respect compared to the now aging A7 III. Anything from usability, performance, features, and ergonomics has been improved. Even compared to our top-of-the-line A1, the A7 IV didn't feel too far behind for general-purpose use and actually introduced some very useful innovations such as the new dials and the focus breathing correction feature, which we would love to see added via firmware to other Sony cameras. The Sony A7 IV is not perfect, of course. There are a few areas where we would have liked to see improvements, and that includes the monitor, the EVF, which isn't bad but could certainly be better, and faster still shooting speed in non-compressed modes. For video shooters, the lack of full-frame 4K 60 is disappointing. We are not sure why this was not possible in this camera, but for those who need 4K slow motion, the A7S III is still the better choice. As extensive as this review is, it can only go so far, and it is important to remember that we were testing a pre-production version of the camera for only a single week. We are planning on buying the camera to supplement our A1 and A7 IV cameras, so we might be able to do some more testing later on. Finally, pricing. The A7 IV should start selling in late 2021 for $2,500. So that was our look at the Sony A7 IV. You can check out the full review with all of our test results on LensVid.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to find more videos just like this. See you next time.